To continue talking about in our introductory unit in AP Biology, we are going to talk more about evolution, because evolution is, again, the overriding theme of biology. And then we'll also spend a little bit of time talking about scientific process and how scientists go about learning about things. So remember that evolution is what helps make sense of everything we know about biology. Of course, you know from previous studies that the organisms that exist today are modified descendants of common ancestors, and that this is used to explain a lot of the patterns of unity and diversity. It seems kind of strange to say that it's responsible for things being alike and also about things being different, but it really is, because of the things that are included in the process of evolution. One scientist said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So what it does is it brings things together at different scales throughout the history of life on Earth. And so this is what's responsible for the unity of life, being the similarities that all living things have with each other, and the diversity, the differences that allow organisms to live in so many different ways in so many different places. When we look at classifying organisms, of course, we have about 1.8 million species that have been identified and named. Almost 2 million different species, and there are lots more that are identified each year. And there are probably 10 to 100 times as many organisms that we haven't found, okay, that we don't know about yet. As scientists develop new techniques and do more observations, more things are discovered, and we're learning things all the time. The branch of biology that names and classifies species, of course, is taxonomy, and we'll talk a little bit about taxonomy, but you should pretty much understand how that works. We have groups. The groups start with very specific, the species, and move outward, and each inclusive group outside that is broader and has more organisms in it that have some characteristics in common. The broadest unit of classification, of course, is the domain, followed by the kingdom. So we have 3 domains of life that have been identified now. Domain bacteria and domain archaea are the 2 domains that encompass the prokaryotes, the non-nucleated cells. Remember that most prokaryotes are single-celled and microscopic. There are a few that are a little bit bigger and maybe have some differences, but we're going to just say in general they're single-celled microscopic organisms. Here we have pictures of representative organisms for the different domains. Of course, we have domain bacteria. This is probably something like E. coli. Domain archaea, which are the extremophiles, the more ancient organisms, and probably ancestral to the eukaryotes that are in domain eukarya. Domain eukarya has at least 4 or more kingdoms in it. 1 kingdom in domain bacteria, that's eubacteria. 1 kingdom in domain archaea, that's kingdom archaebacteria. And eukarya has the plants, kingdom plantae, the fungi, kingdom fungi, the animals, kingdom animalia, and then there are the protists. We used to teach that the kingdom protista, but now the classification of protists is a little bit more complex, and so we're just going to talk about protists as a whole and not necessarily say a kingdom, because there probably are several kingdoms included in the protista. Some are animal-like, some are plant-like, some are fungus-like, and so there are some that just kind of defy grouping in that way, and so nowadays scientists talk about more kingdoms than we are accustomed to talking about in the past. Let's talk a little bit about Darwin. Okay, Darwin is the scientist that we hold responsible for the theory of natural selection. He published his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection in 1859. The 2 main points he made in the book were that the species that live today show evidence of descent with modification from common ancestors, and natural selection is the mechanism behind this. There were other scientists that had already proposed ideas about something similar to descent with modification, but the thing that was different about Darwin's book and the theory that went along with it is that he showed a mechanism that was responsible for this particular thing that had been observed. And so it helped explain the duality, the opposite nature of the unity of all life and the diversity of life at the same time. Of course, you know that he came up with his theories as a result of studying the organisms that he observed throughout that 4-year sea voyage he took in a few years earlier on the HMS Beagle. And we can talk more about that as time goes on. But here are the things, the main points of his theory. Okay, he observed that in a population, there are individuals in the population that vary, and that the variations that are present in the population are inheritable for the most part. Are all variations inheritable? No, of course not. You can have some acquired characteristics that are not going to be inherited by your offspring. He also observed that more offspring are produced than survive, and that means that there's going to be competition. That's the survival of the fittest. Those that are most fit in their environment, those that are best adapted to their environment, will be the ones that survive to reproduce. Generally speaking, the species suit their environment. They fit it in some way that is unique, that allows them to be successful in that environment. Now, from these observations, he inferred that the individuals that are best suited to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. And because of that, over time, more individuals in that population will have those traits that are most advantageous in that ecosystem or in that environment. It's because of reproduction that this gets passed on, because the environment selects for the propagation of beneficial traits, okay? And this is what Darwin called natural selection. It results in that adaptation of organisms to their environment. The example given here, this was in the book, is about bat wings. Okay, the bat wings are definitely an example of adaptation. Bat ancestor didn't have wings, but over time, the wings became a part of the bat's anatomy because of various adaptations that were made in steps along the way throughout the course of time. Here's an example of how something like that might happen. You have a population with a variety of traits. Some are light colored, some are dark colored, and several different ones here. They live in a dark colored environment, which means that the light colored ones are going to stand out more. So you have a bird here that's going to come along and eat the beetles. It's going to get the ones that it can see more easily, and those are going to be the lighter colored ones. The ones that survive are going to be the darker color ones. They'll reproduce and pass along their traits to their offspring. And over time, you'll see an increased frequency of traits that make it possible to survive and reproduce. And again, surviving is important. You must survive, but in order to have those traits pass on to future generations, reproduction has to occur. Reproduction of those survivors has to occur. So, the unity in diversity theme results from or arises from descent with modification. Okay, we see evidence of that in fossils. We can look at the anatomical similarities between different organisms. Darwin said that natural selection could cause a species to give rise to 2 or more descendant species, and of course the ones he looked at in detail were those finches in the Galapagos Islands. And then oftentimes we use a tree-like diagram, okay, that's the tree of life, to show ancestors and their descendants. Now, let's go ahead and talk more about how science is done, okay, because we're going to be doing a lot of inquiry activities, and you're going to have to be able to make observations and propose experiments to test those to test your theories about those or your hypotheses about those observations. So science comes from a Latin word, and it means to know. So science, we say, is a way of knowing things. The search for information is called inquiry. And so what we're going to do in the scientific process is you're going to have to make observations, form hypotheses, and test the hypotheses. In biology, what we're looking at are natural structures, natural processes that we're going to make observations about, form hypotheses about, and test them. And this is based on observation and data analysis. Really, really important to come up with ways to test things. Inductive reasoning is going to be drawing a conclusion through that logical process, okay? And so you're going to be looking at specific observations to allow you to make generalizations. The example given here, the sun always rises in the east. I mean, that wasn't something people were just born knowing. They observed that every time the sun came up, it was in the same direction. And they eventually called that direction east. And so now we can know that the sun always rises in the east. One thing you need to realize about science, you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. We stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us, that had learned things before us, and we're able to take the observations and the knowledge that was gained in previous generations by previous scientists and use that to build upon and learn more things about something that we're looking at. So we're going to ask questions about things, and we're going to propose hypothetical explanations. Remember, that's called a hypothesis. A good definition here, I love this definition, a tentative answer to a well-framed question. Okay? And then that's going to, a scientific hypothesis will lead us to make predictions that we can test by observation or experimentation. Deductive reasoning, more like a detective, okay, uses general premises to make specific predictions. So you can kind of figure out how that works together. Hypotheses science usually makes use of two or more alternative hypotheses and make and compare the results to experiments to look at both of those things. Remember that falsifying a hypothesis does not prove the hypothesis or disprove the hypothesis. And know that in science, we're not usually proving one thing. We are gaining evidence to support or refute our hypothesis rather than proving or disproving something. So remember that your hypothesis has to be testable, it has to be falsifiable, and make sure that you realize there are some questions that can't be addressed by science because of their their source. Supernatural explanations, religious explanations are not things that we're studying in science. That's a totally different thing. We're looking at the natural world and how it responds. And it has nothing to do necessarily with your faith or your belief in any supernatural or other kinds of sources for things. It has to do more with what we can observe and test. Something that is really important, and I want to talk about this now because we're going to be doing a lot of experiments and you're going to have to be coming up with your own experiments, not just ones that I give you to work on. You need to understand some things about experimental controls and repetition. Okay, so we're going to compare when we have a controlled experiment. A lot of times we're used to thinking about controlled variables, and that is a very important concept. But a controlled experiment is talking more about comparing an experimental group with a control group. That is, you've got a group of organisms or a group of something that you're looking at that you are going to change one thing on, and you're going to compare how it responds with a similar group that you don't change that one thing on. So we're going to try to look at only one variable at a time. Sometimes difficult to do, but that's our goal. So a controlled experiment, okay, means that you're using control groups so that you can cancel out the effects of other variables that you're not wanting to look at. It doesn't mean that you're always keeping those things constant. It means that you're using it as a basis of comparison. And it must be repeatable. In science, that's a really, really important concept. You have to repeat it. If you do it once and you get a result, that's great. But it doesn't show a pattern until you continue to do the same sort of thing and you get the same kinds of results every time. So it's important when you're doing inquiry, and you'll be doing a lot of inquiry this year, that you do it more than once to see if you get the same kind of results. Sometimes you'll find that your results are very, very different. Does that mean you did something wrong? Not necessarily, but it may mean that the way you're testing something or whether you're looking at something is not the best way to do it. In science, of course, we talk about theories a lot, and you please remember that a theory is broader in scope than a hypothesis. In everyday language, oftentimes we'll say, well, that's your theory about something, and we mean in everyday language that a theory is just somebody's idea of something. Okay, but in science, there's specific meaning to a theory. Okay, a theory is supported in science is supported by a large body of evidence. Okay, The theories are very general. They can lead to lots of testable hypotheses, okay, but they're going to have a large body of evidence supporting the theory before it's considered an actual theory. So non-scientific people may think the theory of evolution is just somebody's crazy idea, but in science we know that a theory has a lot of evidence to support it, so we look at that evidence and see how it supports the generalized idea that we're talking about. It's also really important that you understand that science uses a cooperative approach to things. In other words, you oftentimes have teams working on things, and you'll be working most of the time with a lab group in here. And so if you're working in research, and some of you may have done some of this in the summertime, you'll know that there are various people that are involved in the team, okay? Not only the professor, but also graduate students and undergraduate students. It's important that you have good communication. Okay, and so publication is a really important part of what scientists do because that allows scientists to check each other's claims. Now, doesn't mean necessarily that you're trying to refute what somebody else found. It's saying, oh, that's kind of cool. I wonder if it always works that way, and you try it again. Okay, it's definitely not unusual for different scientists to work on the same question. Okay, and the scientists share the data, and that allows you to gain more understanding of the same concept or the same hypothesis from different points of view. So the goal of science, we want to understand natural things in the natural world, okay? Natural phenomena. Technology is interdependent with science, okay? It's using scientific knowledge for a specific purpose. And so what we're going to find is that we use technology and science together for a lot of things. I like this statement here: biology is marked by discoveries while technology is marked by inventions. So you don't invent a process, you discover the process that occurs there. And so realize that we sometimes we talk about ethics, and we spent some time in your earlier biology course talking about bioethics, and we'll continue to talking about how the ethical issues can influence our understanding of things. Another important thing to understand is that it's okay when we have different viewpoints in science, okay? A lot of things have inventions, discoveries, and so forth have occurred where you have ideas from different cultures and different points of view. And so diverse viewpoints are really, really important, not only between partners or between members of a team, but also totally different groups of understanding. And so all of those things working together can help us understand the big picture a lot better. All right, that concludes this particular lesson. And study hard. Be sure and read your chapters.